Okay, well, a very good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where in the world you are tuning in from. My name is Adrian Reed, and I'm really pleased to be bringing you this BA Community webinar this evening. So clearly, the world has changed for a lot of us in many ways due to the COVID-19 crisis and many other things that are sort of affecting the world at the moment. So we thought it would be good to get together and discuss a fairly sort of broad set of topics. So the webinar this evening is entitled Business Analysis During Times of Crisis, and we're going to have an interactive panel discussion. Now, we have three fantastic panel members who I'll introduce you to and who will introduce themselves in just a second. But one thing I wanted to say is we've got some themes we're going to discuss, but this is very, very much designed to be interactive. So if you are tuning in live, please do ask questions as we go along. And perhaps some of the themes we'll be thinking about is how we can help within our organisations, because during this crisis or other crises, there's a need for analysis, even if organisations don't necessarily see it. But also, how can we use our analysis skills to help in our communities? And are there any BA weaknesses which might emerge even more prominently in these types of situation? So we're joined by Christina Lovelock, Dr. Debra Paul, and Grant Wright. So thank you all for joining this evening. I think it would only be fitting for us to start to get you all to just introduce yourselves a little bit and perhaps say, a few words about why this topic interests you so much. So, so Tina, if I could invite you to go first.
Well, thank you very much for putting this together, Adrian, and for everything that you do generating content for the community. It's very much appreciated. I'm Christina Lovelock, I'm a BA manager, and I've built BA teams of different sizes in various different public sector organisations. My area of particular interest is entry-level BA roles, so that's things like apprenticeships, graduate schemes and career change opportunities. I had the opportunity a few years ago to lead a employer group putting together the first ever apprenticeship standard. And at the moment, I'm chairing the review of that standard. So the apprenticeship is going to be updated for the most up-to-date changes in the sector and the profession. I had the privilege last year to co-author a book called Delivering Business Analysis with Dr. Debra Paul. And I think at that point, I'll probably hand over to Debbie and let her introduce herself.
With that seamless segue. So Debbie, over to you.
Well, firstly, can I say how impressed I am with Christina for that segue, which I hadn't seen coming. Yes, I'm Debbie Paul, and I'm the Managing Director of Assist Knowledge Development, and I've also written some business analysis books for BCS, working collaboratively with fabulous people like Tina. My particular interest is this. I really believe in analytical thinking, and I think that in times of difficulty or even crisis, analytical thinking is essential, and business analysts should be the people with the techniques and the competencies to really be able to contribute, and I feel that that's really, really important.
Fantastic, excellent. Thank you very much, Debbie. So Grant, over to you.
Hi, so I'm Grant Wright. I've worked in business analysis and change delivery for probably over 20 years now, and the last 14, 15 years of that, I've set up my own consultancy firm in business analysis and business architecture. And over the years, that's kind of grown into business transformation, agile product management, those kind of areas. My particular kind of hot topic and theme that I'm interested in at the moment is visual thinking as a way of bringing shared understanding and alignment to organisations and enabling better change. I think in terms of this particular topic, I think very similar to what Debbie just talked about. I think as BAs, we're uniquely placed to be able to not only think analytically, as Debbie said, but also to think holistically, to see those interactions across business systems and to use the flexibility that I think a lot of us have. BAs are often the kind of jack of all trades, and I think there's a lot we can bring in a time of crisis.
Fantastic, fantastic. And I think that visual thinking resonates so much with me, as I'm sure it does with others. And I've seen some of the fabulous sketch notes you've done, Grant. I always love it when you sort of publish a new one. So okay, well let's kick off then. So if we think about times of crisis, either the COVID-19, which is very current, or crises generally, how can we help? How can we help as BAs? So who would like to offer an opinion on that one? Debbie, you look like you've got an opinion.
Oh, Adrian, I always look like I've got an opinion, even when I don't. How can we help? It's a really interesting question, because I look at different situations that are going on. Obviously, there are some organisations where it's incredibly difficult even to apply the best analytical thinking, and I do agree with Grant, the best holistic thinking, because they are organisations, you know, such as those that are letting out, you know, blocks of conference rooms and things like that. It's a very difficult situation for those organisations, and I have to say we have to recognise that.
Yep.
But there are a lot of organisations where they're adapting really, really well, and I know of several where the business analysis team have been right at the core of helping that to happen. And what they're doing is looking at situations and looking at, well, what outcome is going to work for our organisation? And also, can I apply some of my tools and techniques to think about this holistically, to think maybe about what's a different value stream we could offer in this situation that will actually offer benefit, not only to the organisation, but to the people employed within it. There are so many techniques business analysts have that help them explore different options and think about how they can improve things, or even put something completely different in place. And this is something I've been involved in recently. And that thinking really has the potential to contribute, but it does need business analysts to understand the tools they've got in their toolkit and use them. So, you know, I do agree with Grant on the visualization. Sometimes people seem to be afraid to use techniques where they actually draw something free format.
Yes.
I'm terrible at drawing. I will tell you now. I mean, it just looks bad, but it helps me to think. It helps me to get that mental picture. And actually, it's good enough to communicate with. Those types of techniques pulled together, understanding that there are always options, help us to innovate and really develop new offerings for organisations. And that, I think, is a toolkit and a set of skills that organisations need at the moment.
Absolutely. And just sort of springboarding from a few things there, Debbie, so that idea that actually, you know, as business analysts, we can help identify different value streams, which implies, again, our sort of understanding of the customer and what the customers you know, actually want, not necessarily what the business has been thinking they want for years and years and years. So now's the time to innovate potentially as well. And that's it's interesting about the visual thinking, because I think it was systems thinker Donella Meadows who said something along the lines of, you know, the problem with mental models is they're in your head, and, you know, anything we can do to make those mental models explicit is a good thing, because then you can have a conversation about them.
Yeah.
And even if it is just a sketch, a really ugly sketch, it creates it cultivates the conditions where a conversation can happen. Then we can sort of move the conversation forward.
Absolutely.
So Tina or Grant, anything to add?
Well, something I was going to add to that is a kind of a less known element of the BA toolkit, and that's around structured decision making. So using things like SWOT analysis and options appraisals to help organisations that are having to make decisions very rapidly, and ensuring that those decisions we know that they're not going to be made with the full facts, they're going to be made with the facts that are available, but at least those decisions are arrived at in a structured way. Is a tendency in this kind of situation where decisions have to be made rapidly, that decisions are going to be made by the person who presents their argument most confidently, not the person who has the most information or has taken the most logical approach to get to their recommendation. And I think one of the things that BAs can help to do is lay out a framework for structured decision making.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And as you were saying that Tina, I was thinking about something I was doing very recently, which is very low tech, but was around, essentially, if you imagine a decision tree with, you know, probabilistic, essentially, so perceived probabilities on each branch, and working out what the outcome would be if different things occurred, and the types of decisions that would need to be made at each point. But actually, you know, although right now none of us know when the lockdown will end, we know there's a decision point on a certain date, and it will probably either end then or it won't, type of thing. And you can put a probability on it, and you can sort of think forward. So that's really interesting as well, around decision making. So Grant, anything to add?
I think Debbie spoke about the kind of the value stream and looking at that. I think for me it's also about looking at the way we realise that value stream. So it's not necessarily changing the fundamentals of the value stream, but how we achieve it. You know, we've seen some really innovative ways of responding to the crisis, and if we can't do things a certain way, that we can adapt and do things differently. And I think the other thing, particularly BAs working in an IT context, being able to bring awareness of what digital technologies can bring to the table is probably another good one to draw out. I think you know, there are examples of, you know, organisations using robotic process automation to respond quickly and proactively get in touch with customers about order status, to be able to sort of prevent demand on a call centre, for example, and try and leverage technologies to react quickly in a way that you couldn't do in the traditional way. So I think BAs that have some exposure to those kind of skills, I think, can help in that sense as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, sort of thinking about that, sort of springboarding from that, Grant, it is interesting, isn't it? Because I think, and I think actually, Debbie, we may have discussed this before at some point, but there's a sort of if I think about my own career in business analysis, there was a time where I wanted to distance myself from technology because everyone saw BA as an IT role. But actually, perhaps there's an argument that says we push that away too far, and actually, you know, we shouldn't push technology away any more than we say, you know, push process or people. So actually knowing the technology can be an enabler could be quite useful as well.
Yeah, I think it opens up an awareness of possibilities, Adrian. I think, you know, I was actually chatting to my family over dinner, and we were talking about different apps that can do things that I didn't even know they could do. And I think just having an awareness of what's possible can spark creative thoughts and ideas how to solve a problem. If you don't know what's out there, how do you know that you're, you know, going after the best kind of option, if that makes sense?
Yeah, having that sort of broad awareness of the, you know, digital technologies, collaboration technologies, whatever it happens to be.
From my conversations with BAs in all different sectors, it sounds like a lot of organisations are going through a similar process of reprioritising their change portfolio, pausing some things, rapidly investing in other things. And that potentially causes, if there's kind of delays and bottlenecks there, that potentially introduces some capacity in the short term in business analysis services. When you were mentioning the value, about different value streams, I was thinking about different value propositions that the BA service can offer. And one thing that we usually would like to be able to offer is internal process improvement and continuous service improvement into our own organisations and internal processes. But often we don't have the capacity to do that because we're on customer facing projects. This might be the time that we can prioritise some of that internal development work.
That's really interesting, isn't it? And you know, because if you think about the classic Eisenhower matrix, or, you know, the important urgent thing, where often organisations get caught in a doom loop of only ever looking at the important and urgent, which means the important but not urgent gets left until it's important and urgent, and you've got no choice, and you can only renew with the same vendor or whatever because you've got no time. But actually, maybe we can use this to break that feedback loop. Like if we do it well, we can say, okay, well, let's not always operate in firefighting mode. Fantastic. So we have our first question of the evening, comes from David, who says, evening, how can we take steps to get BAs proactively involved in crisis management, i.e. before it becomes a project?
How can we take steps? I think that's a question that in maybe a slightly different form, we've asked for such a long time.
Yeah.
You know, how can we raise the awareness, recognition, credibility of the business analysis value proposition, if you like? I mean, you know, Adrian, that I feel very strongly that there are a number of aspects to this, one of which is being clear about what our value proposition is. And actually not only being able to express and communicate it, but understanding it ourselves and accepting the responsibility that that puts on us. Tina wrote a fabulous paper and did a brilliant presentation on BA behaviours years ago, I think. And it really summarised so many things, because it's that having the right, but also having responsibility, and they're two sides of the coin. So some of the steps we need to take are actually in our own hands. And I think recognising that and stepping up to that is really, really important.
I was thinking exactly the same thing, Debbie, is that one of the things that we're going to have to do is put our hands up a bit more and say, we've got the skills, we've got potentially the capacity, if this is a higher priority than what we were already doing, and put ourselves forward to those forums that are going to be looking around for anybody who can help with these situations.
But also make sure that we do have the skills. You know, I mean, it does astonish me sometimes when business analysts dismiss an area of skill or a particular technique or tool or something. And I think we're in a world now where being a resource investigator, good old Belbing team role, but I do think a resource investigator is a very, very important characteristic at the moment, because coming back to something Grant was talking about with using digital technologies, I've actually found that if you are working with people who have curiosity, who have analytical skills, who know where to look and can collaborate, you've got the basis for something really, really good coming out of that. And there's an awful lot of business analysis in that piece of work, but there is an attitude that has to sit above it as well.
Definitely. So a lot of good tips there, and it's interesting. I mean, just a random observation, but I was reading a news article about how Tesco, the supermarket, UK supermarket Tesco, had actually been able to adapt quite well to the scenario because they'd done a doomsday scenario analysis. And of course, they didn't know it was going to be a pandemic, but they'd done a doomsday scenario analysis on what happens if our entire head office is uninhabitable for a significant period of time. And they'd presumably run tests or whatever. So it was almost like, well, okay, this is happening, bring the plan out type of thing. So I think sort of like scenario analysis is an interesting one as well, isn't it? So, okay, so our next question comes from Emily, and Emily asks, with the isolation measures, it seems to paralyze some organizations. As BAs, I really believe we can help our stakeholders go through change management, recognizing that everyone goes through change management at a different speed. Do you agree? So, Grant, what do you think about the more human side and change management? Would you agree with Emily on that one?
Yeah, I think the important thing is as BAs, we are really well placed when we're helping drive through and support a change initiative, because our role typically is to really understand the business problem we're trying to solve, see the connections across business systems and information systems, and help tell that story to the teams that are trying to deliver the change and support them through it. So I think we're really well placed with our understanding to be able to enable change. And I'm bringing up visual thinking again, I can't help myself, but we can use our techniques and ways to visualize an understanding of a problem or why we're doing a change to bring people along on the journey as well. And I think that's an angle we can bring to facilitating change if we've got distributed teams, taking the time when we're kicking off a particular meeting or a phase of a project to to bring everybody in the virtual room on the same page, and to make sure when we walk away from the virtual room that we've all got that shared understanding of what we heard. I think they're both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, definitely. And even in like creating that vision, that shared vision, just a picture. I mean, I know it's a cliche, but the picture speaking 1,000 words type of thing. So fantastic. So Tina or Debbie, any other thoughts on sort of helping stakeholders go through that sort of change cycle? Or rather, like emotional response to change, I should say.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I have had various people comment to me, and I have encountered organisations during this period where senior stakeholders have just put their heads in the ground and pretended they were ostriches. And unfortunately, that has happened. And I think in those organisations, there's probably been an awful lot of work to get them then to move. And, you know, there's a lot of comfort in pretending it's not happening at one stage, but actually you can't. And talking to somebody I know recently who works in a business school, she made the comment, and she doesn't work in business change, but she made the comment that they've gone through a change process that would normally have taken them possibly 2 years. And they've done it in a matter of weeks. And I know exactly how that feels, and I'm sure a lot of people do. And interestingly, I think once people are galvanized that this is a reality and we have to collaborate and we have to pull together as a team, in organizations where they can do that, they can address the emotion, because they know they're in an uncertain world, but they've got a certainty of focus and outcome for their part in it. That really helps, I think. And I think we're all going through that emotional curve very, very quickly, because if we don't, we're going to be stuck in rejection and denial, and that's not going to help anybody.
And it's really is interesting, isn't it, Debbie? Because that sense of, if we think about, well, how can we help now, and what positives can we take away from this awful situation? And in no way do I want to downplay the awful situation and the tragedies which are occurring, but you think about that, how quickly good change can be done. Proper, robust, thought through change can be done if some of the organizational baggage is gotten out of the way. And part of that has to be, or in my view, has to be that shared view. And I know it's a cliche, and I'm almost embarrassed to say it, but a little bit of wartime spirit in the, well, we're all in this together type of thing. I can see Tina smirking at that quite rightly. But maybe that says something about, well, more routine projects actually in a non-pandemic world. Well, if there was a better connection between people and the outcomes and the organizational outcomes, and more of a shared values, perhaps change would be more successful.
It does make me think though, Adrian, usually when people are resistant to change in some way, it's because they have a perceived loss from the change that they're experiencing. And I don't know whether organisations have taken enough time to reflect on what staff have lost in this period. And that's going to be different for every person in every household. But even the kind of small things about going to work, interacting with colleagues, being able to meet for a coffee, all of those things add up to quite a big sense of loss. And I think that's something that needs to be recognised in this change process.
Yeah. And I think something that's probably important for us all to recognise is that, well, I don't know about all of you on the call, but I've had days where I haven't felt okay. And actually that's okay. You see lots of posts about people saying, oh, it's great, you can do all this professional development and you've got all this extra time, and it's like, not everyone has extra time, and actually that it's not terribly helpful seeing, for some people that might well be a reality and it's great for them, but I think different people have different circumstances.
Yes.
And anyone who's not feeling okay, that's okay. And we should be empathetic to that.
Yes.
Okay, so we've got lots and lots of questions coming in. I can pretty much, we will cover as many as we can, but just before we take the next one, I want to shift gear a little bit and think about helping within our neighbourhoods and communities. So that might be other communities, professional communities, it might be our neighbourhoods, but it strikes me that actually the analysis skill set isn't just for organisations, we could help in our local communities as well if we could mobilise somehow. So this is an open question, and it's a really hard one. But how can we as BAs help in our local or other communities?
Well, this is a very non-specific answer to that question, Adrian, and I know it
depends. It depends. Say it.
Something I know I've said to you before is that business analysis as a profession is a very collaborative profession compared to, for example, project management, which is a bit more of a competitive profession. And so I think that feeling of collaboration and those skills that we've got around collaboration really lend themselves to different initiatives within communities and different volunteering initiatives. So I think, aside from our analytical skills, our collaboration skills are going to be really valuable to our communities.
Definitely. Any other thoughts, Grant or Debbie?
I think for me, different people are in different positions at this time. Some people aren't working, for various reasons, and it may be that therefore they can actually, offer physical support to communities, transporting people to shops, picking up prescriptions, that type of thing. Some of us are having to work quite a lot at the moment, so that's more difficult. And some people have home circumstances, say they live with an elderly parent or something like that. So there are all sorts of different combinations of circumstances. But the one thing I've learned during this time is there are often small things you can contribute. And sometimes those small things make a difference to some people. And so even if, sometimes I feel a bit guilty because I see people volunteering and I think, gosh, I just can't because I have to work. And that hopefully helps various people. But there are certain small things I can do that can help various people in various communities. And it's always worthwhile making that contribution. And sometimes it's finding resources for people. Sometimes it's being able to help people do things online because they're not comfortable themselves. Got an elderly community, for example. So there's all sorts of things that I think we can try and add if we look for it. And one of the great things about business analysts is we do take a holistic view of situations, and we are able to look for things that may be small things to us, but they can help somebody a great deal.
Absolutely. And the law of compound interest, a series of small incremental things can lead to something big. So Grant, anything to add on in terms of helping sort of local communities or other communities?
Yeah, so I probably will say it depends, Adrian. I think
fantastic.
like Debbie just said, I think I've worked a lot with kind of contract BAs, and quite a few people have been hit hard at the time in between contracts, and it's not the best time to be trying to find another gig. And so I know people who've actually offered their services for free to get involved and to help other companies do things and just to keep their skills fresh, or to share some of what they know. There are training companies out there that have made some of their material available for the community, while people have been maybe unable to work and they want to upskill. So I think there's things we can do as a BA community to help each other. I think in terms of the local community, I think if you look at small businesses that are out there and very traditional businesses, some of those have been hit hard, and maybe offering just a bit of business consultancy and support about that art of possible. What could you do? There's a local company near us that's a local corner sweet shop, and they've opened up a kind of Facebook group and Messenger, and then they're doing local deliveries, and my kids had a delivery and they thought it was Christmas last weekend because we had a whole mountain of sweets arrive. But little things like that means that they can sustain, and it's a local organisation as well that you can kind of keep moving. So I think those kind of things.
It is interesting, isn't it? I think I suppose this is true of all professions, but I think sometimes as BAs we're quite analytical, clearly, and we think a lot about things, and I think it's easy sometimes for us to think that small things that are obvious to us will be obvious to everyone. Whereas actually that's not necessarily. Sometimes something that seems obvious to us, if just that one tip might help another business much in the same way as stuff that's obvious to them won't be obvious to us, type of thing. It's so fantastic. So let's move on to some more of the live questions that are coming in. So Michelle says, I love Tina's post on LinkedIn about using Pestle to help us understand what the post-lockdown world might look like. We've also done lockdown SWOTs to help us think about our own response to being in lockdown, and looked at BBC News headlines to chart the progress through the change curve in 11 days. What other BA techniques can help us to understand the changes we're all going through? Well, that's silence the panel.
You're going to have to pick, Adrian. Well, I don't mind if you like, because ever since this started, I have been shouting at the television screen probably every day, and possibly at the radio as well. Could somebody do some what if analysis, please? And what else analysis as well? Because it's just unbelievable to me. I feel like scenario analysis just hasn't been thought through enough. And it is something that is a technique that anybody can do. But it is very much key to analytical thinking, and it is so needed at the moment to actually think through, you know, the what if and what else analysis. So yes, it's giving me a very bad time from shouting at televisions, which I have to stop. But I do think it could be really valuable. The other technique that I like to think about is risk analysis, because sometimes we look at risks in a very linear way. We say, here's the risk, here's a countermeasure. I think in today's world, we could be saying, here's a risk. By what amount will these countermeasures, it's back to your decision tree view of probability, by what amount will these countermeasures help to reduce that risk? And if together they can reduce the risk sufficiently, is that worthwhile? And I think we can think about these things on a personal basis. You know, it doesn't have to be the whole country. I'm not esteemed enough for that, but certainly on a personal and on a community basis, you can look at, you know, what sorts of measures together help minimize risk. So those are two areas that I think could be used really advisedly at the moment. So
sort of risk analysis and that scenario analysis, and with the what if, what else question.
Yeah, so sort of merged.
Yeah. So Grant, Tina, any additions that spring to mind?
Yeah, well, there's one that I'm thinking of, Adrian, which you're probably far better qualified than I am to talk about, which is in the systems thinking space. I saw a great diagram on Twitter. I was just pulling it up while looking at it, where a lady who's worked with her twin daughters to come up with a causal loop, causal chain diagram, and to show the multifaceted kind of impacts and connections that the virus causes. You know, the impact of the virus, meaning that we try and keep people indoors, the pressure that has on something else, and it's a complex system.
Yes.
So actually using those kind of techniques to show the interdependencies and those less linear problems, I guess, that are less obvious, and to look for those kind of causal hubs that kind of point towards where we could make an improvement. I think that would be a pretty good technique.
Yeah, definitely agree. Sort of multiple cause diagrams, causal loops, fantastic techniques there. And Tina, anything to add?
I was thinking of something similar, which is a kind of hybrid of a fishbone analysis with a force field analysis. So for each of the bones on the fish, you can treat as a kind of small force field analysis. So particularly if you're thinking about casting forward into the future, things that might happen and things that might not happen along each spine of the fish. I feel like I'm not explaining that.
No, you are. I think you should give that technique your name. That should forever be known as the Lovelock analysis or something.
Or the force fish analysis.
The force fish. The force fish. You heard it here first, folks. Okay, so then our next live question is from Maya, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Maya. Maya asks, how do you see the BA of the future in terms of skills required? And now that's clearly a very broad question, but it's an interesting question, because has the COVID-19 question or crisis changed the skills that will be required in the short, medium and long-term future? What do you reckon?
I think it's definitely given us food for thought, I think. So, I'm sure a lot of BAs and the people on the call will recognise how difficult it is to get somebody in an organisation to be interested in non-functional requirements. And now we've all got a fantastic case study. One good thing to come out of this is, when we want to have that conversation about business resilience and disaster recovery and security, if we have to work remotely, we've got a great example that we can lean on now. So I do think it heightens the awareness of the need for non-functional requirements. That's an obvious one that springs to mind.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, isn't it, Grant? Because I've often been in situations where almost like organisations have equated disaster recovery with backup, and it's like no, that's one element of a wider DR strategy. If you're just doing backup, you're not doing DR.
What we're talking about business continuity and the ability to be able to scale up and scale down business operations and productions in response to demand like this. I think the reason a lot of the economy is being caught out is because they're reliant on people being out there actively engaged and spending their money. How can you structure your business model in such a way that you have more natural resilience in the way you set up your business operations?
Yeah, definitely. Excellent. Tina or Debbie, anything to add?
Well, something that Grant mentioned right at the beginning was around flexibility, and I think that's something that we have to probably work on as a profession. We can be a little bit set in our ways. Sometimes BAs are working on the same product or service for many years, become very entrenched in ways of thinking or very reliant on their business knowledge. And so that makes me wonder how flexible we really are put into a new situation or a firefighting situation.
Yeah, just actually bringing in, I'll bring in another question that's been asked by John, because it's sort of it dovetails with what you're saying there, Tina. And John asks, for BAs who are currently out of work due to the pandemic, what can they do to be at the front of the hiring queue when the lockdown is lifted? I mean, that's a really pertinent but big question. Any thoughts on that?
I'd say the same for as I do for anybody who's got any kind of career break on their CV. Have a good story to tell for that time, and that can involve lots of different things. And it might be professional development and continuous learning, it might be volunteering, it might be getting involved in online events and things that are going on within the profession, but be able to tell a good story for that period of time, be proud of that period of time and what you were doing.
Yeah, I'd also say have a look at your own self-development, but I'd highly recommend looking outside the world of business analysis. I've found that some of the step changes in my understanding and the value I've been able to bring to the consultancy work I do has often been driven by me looking outside the boundaries of the BA world. Looking at things like design thinking, visual thinking, as I've been talking about, but looking at related disciplines. Quite often it just brings a different perspective, and it just adds another string to your bow. So when you do put yourself back out there, you can say, I can do all this BA stuff, but also I know about this, and this as well. And I think that can help you stand out.
Definitely, fantastic. So our next question, and this is someone that you and I know, Debbie, and I know you can pronounce her name better than I can, but I'm going to try. So apologies if I. So Hertje, is that Debbie? You can pronounce it better, I think.
Yes, Hertje.
Oh, okay. I didn't get it too bad. So
you were very good.
Thanks a lot. I'm getting better. Due to this crisis, organisations are digitising very fast, with a lot of focus on the technological side. BAs with a holistic view can help to keep the attention for people inside and outside the organisation as well. But do you have any remote techniques in mind for this, for sort of facilitating and cultivating that holistic view? Because it is difficult when you've got, Zoom rather than people in the same room.
Is it though? See, I would like to question that, because I think that we have moved into a world where we understand digital business analysis as a term much, much better now. I think there was a period when, even though we talked about technology, we still had a lot of focus on software and development. and working within teams in that area, as well as doing obviously process improvement and other things as well. But I think what's happened now is we haven't had the time to go for some of those projects. And I think, as Tina said earlier, some projects have had to be put on hold or shelved. But what we have had to do is deliver outcomes.
Yes.
And as you know, and Tina knows, I'm a great advocate of service thinking. So we've now had systems thinking, design thinking, and service thinking all in this one webinar. Well done us, because they're all really, really important, I think. And I think they all come together. And business analysts, I believe, can really help move an organization by pulling that type of thinking together and understanding how we leverage technology. And there's a lot of technology available. There's a lot of resources available now that we are focusing more on leveraging to achieve an outcome. And I think that's been a massive shift, and a very, very productive shift for business analysis, because we are the role that understands things like capability and understand the technological and other assets that organizations own that can actually be galvanized to deliver something. So that, I think, is where we're going with technology more and more now, in order to actually move rapidly, which is what we needed to do. And I don't think we're going to be able to step back from that very easily.
Fantastic. Any Tina or Grant, anything to add?
I think we just talked about service thinking there. When we had the brief conversation about the careers and how to kind of upskill yourself, and I was talking about looking at other fields, that was exactly what I had in my mind's eye when I was talking about it. A lot of the stuff that I did when I looked outside the field of business analysis was looking at service design as an extension of the wider customer and user experience. And when I looked at that, I first looked at it and thought, what's so different, what's so special? It just looks like good holistic business analysis where you think about your customers and their end-to-end experience. But I think a lot of people don't step outside the boundaries of their internal organizations and the teams they work with directly. So I think being able to see the human side of what users and customers actually need and how that integrates with the digital technology, the service design experience is about from the point the customer makes contact with you all the way through to the point when they kind of leave that engagement with the organization, and that starts and stops with people often and not the technology. So I think it's a great call to call out service thinking as well.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I want to move on, because the questions are literally flooding in this evening. I think this is a topic that people are really interested in. So there's a question here, in fact, and there are a few related questions on this topic, but Shane asks, are there any unique tools you would recommend to help with collaboration during this more challenging time? Shane goes on to say, I'm currently using MS Teams and Azure DevOps, but I'm wondering if I'm missing out on anything. And again, there are a few other sort of questions around tools and collaboration tools or facilitating. So Michelle asks, we have a lunch and learn session next week looking at how to facilitate virtual workshops. What tips do you have on running a really successful workshop where everyone is online? I know that's a slightly different question, because the first one is about the tools, the second one is about the techniques. But I mean, just sort of virtual facilitation and virtual tools. Any thoughts or tips on those topics?
I was introduced to a tool this week by Jill Kent, who I think is on the webinar, so just shout out to Jill, which is called Miro. And I feel like you might have also mentioned that to me, Adrian. So I've used that for the first time this week and loving it. I also use Slido quite a lot for polling and quizzes and things for, online and when I'm in the room with people. So those are my kind of top tools.
And just to echo that, so Google Jamboards, if you haven't come across Google Jamboards, it's not as feature filled as some of the others, but it has the ability that if you can share it with someone without a Google account, then it's if you've got people who are in different organizations and that sort of thing. So Debbie and Grant, any tools on either the facilitation of virtual sessions or the tools?
I'm just trying to find one that I've got here.
Oh, you have one of those. Fantastic.
Yeah,
A camera.
a document camera.
Yeah.
So, particularly I'm doing visual thinking and practicing the kind of hand-drawn stuff. You can use that. It's effectively a webcam that's pointing down with a light, and you can draw and sketch. But actually, a really good tool to use. And I mean that one I just flashed up there, I think it's like less than £100. It's not. You can go to town with the equipment, but that's it's fit for purpose and works really well. So I think that's a good one.
Definitely.
So similar to Tina, we don't use Miro, although we sometimes fall back on it, but we use Mural, which is, it's a great collaboration tool actually, because I think one of the interesting things that's happening with online facilitation, of whatever type of session it is, and Microsoft obviously tapped into it, but you sort of feel like you're building a team who collaborated on something within that particular session. And the great thing about using tools like Mural is that you've got that team discussion captured that everybody can then sort of keep and refer to and refer back to, so that they can, refresh their memory or whatever. And that's great for collaboration, because, it has that sense of that's what we created in that space and time. And I think there is something very collaborative about that, very rewarding about it. But also online sort of quiz and poll tools like Slido, but also Kahoot is another one that we use. They're all useful in all sorts of different ways actually at the moment, because one of the things we haven't quite touched on yet is the sort of well-being sense of the people during this disrupted time when, most people are working at home. There can be some, quite extreme isolation going on. And actually some of these tools just help to remind us that we are part of something a lot of the time. And those sorts of tools offer us opportunities to put in place sessions that help with that.
Yeah, absolutely. The tools, I mean, it is amazing some of the tools that are available to us now, for a very modest price. And then on the facilitation slide, I mean, just a few things, because I've been facilitating a fair number of things virtually recently. And one thing, I can't remember who gave me this tip, but it's one that's always stuck with me, is if you can, open up the room 15 minutes early and let people know you're doing it for the social chat.
Yes.
Because actually, why shouldn't people have a virtual coffee before the session? And it'll probably run a bit smoother. And I really wish I could remember who gave me that tip, but yeah, so that I found to be quite effective. So, okay, so our next question comes from James, and James notes that the results of a survey a BA manager did with her teams was split, with BAs flourishing and struggling to adapt to the lockdown. How important is it for BAs to reflect on their own mindsets in order to understand their stakeholders?
Very important. If you think about it, when you're dealing with stakeholders or engaging with other people in any sense, it's very easy to make tacit assumptions.
Yes.
That where they're coming from. And it is a very, very sensible thing to do, to reflect on your own motivation and your own beliefs and how much you are projecting them onto other people, and to try and look at the world through their eyes. Because sometimes you hear people talking about stakeholders being extremely difficult and things like that. And I always ask myself, well, what's their reality? And what are you imposing on it from your reality? It can be very instructive.
Yeah, and it is interesting, isn't it? Because there's the whole element of, I mean, this could take us off on a very long tangent, so I will keep this short, but there's the whole issue of worldview. Yes. Underneath all of this, and the narratives that people perhaps have internalized because of their lived experience, and the reality they're sort of living in. Because if you're living with kids in a flat without a garden, that's a very different reality to if you're living in a suburban place, and or whatever it happens to be. And I think this is a time when, I mean, I suppose we should always give people the benefit of the doubt, but you know, it's probably more likely than ever that somebody's been touched by something quite traumatic. I mean, that's quite likely at the best of times, but, you know, we should cut people even more slack. And the other thing, I was reading an article, and I can't remember where it was, but someone was saying it's the first time that, you know, how are you doing can actually mean how are you doing.
Yes.
We don't just have to say, all right, thanks, how are you? You know, and I mean, that might be a peculiarly British thing. I don't know if it's the same everywhere, but it's a bit of a platitude normally. So, okay, so I am going to rabbit through as many questions as I can in about the next 5 minutes. So it's only the first person who can respond to these who'll get a look in. So get your buzzers at the ready, panel. So David asks, this current situation transcends geopolitical boundaries. What opportunities do the panel see in this providing?
I think the obvious one that springs to mind is the observations around climate change that have been seen. I think I read somewhere that New York City has seen a 50% reduction in emissions or something. So I think it's a real eye-opener. And I haven't really stopped to think about what that might mean, but it's definitely enough to make you think, well, what's the possibilities of this new world? You know, when we go back to the new normal, it is going to be different. And yeah, I think it opens your eyes, doesn't it, when you hear statistics like that, and all by us slowing down the machine or thinking about things a different way. Now, some things will have to slot back into place and go back to normal as it was, but I think it does cause you to think about what are the possibilities, what are the opportunities, how could we work differently. And I think once you've been exposed to doing things a certain way, I think you're more likely to change your habits. You know, people not being able to travel on a motorway and use public transport, people will naturally be more likely to use public transport again once they've done it for a while. And it's those kind of things. I think it's just interesting to see where it takes us.
Definitely, and I want to bring in a question that Jill asks, because it's a related question, which is, how do we ensure that some of the beneficial changes that are made during this difficult time do not get lost and forgotten when we eventually get to the other side? And James asks a similar question, which is, how can BAs play a role in capturing lessons from the massive changes that all businesses have made? So any thoughts on those? Anyone? Tina, Debbie or Grant?
I think some of our tools around retrospectives, for example, are particularly important. And usually we do retrospectives with the idea of improving on how things have gone. And there's less focus on what's gone well and what do we want to keep and what are we learning from that. And I think if we particularly bring that lens, you know, what have we enjoyed, what have we learned, what do we want to keep, to retrospectives, then we've got a way of documenting that and feeding that into our organisations.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so Christian asks that or observes the current lockdown has prompted organisations to work remotely and therefore necessitated the use of IT and communication technology. Is it now an essential skill, i.e. IT, that a BA should have, and essentially should we be aware of that and if necessary be retrained?
Yeah, I was going to jump in when we were talking earlier about facilitation, because I came across a great resource. I was going to mention it for the call. So there's a facilitators group. It's a Facilitators for Pandemic Response group. And they've got a group. It's f4c-response.groups.io. And that's got a Google document with so much information about different facilitation techniques, tools, how to approach it from a small meeting to a big conference. I think working in this way has changed our reality already. And I think knowing how to use those tools, knowing how to elicit requirements when you're remote, I think is one of the most challenging things, when you naturally walk into a meeting room. And I've done it before. You kind of go in, and because you know an organisation and the people in it, you can go in almost semi-prepared, but it's okay because you can read the room and you use your relationships and you draw on that. That's much harder to do remotely, especially when you're trying to wrestle with technology to break down that barrier. So I think there is a demand that we need to step up to in being able to use those tools, I think, and achieve the same or better outcomes.
Yeah, yeah. Fantastic. Well, I'm afraid time is almost against us, as it always is. We're almost at 1:30. So to everyone that's tuned in live, thank you for all your questions, and apologies that we haven't been able to cover quite all of them. We've covered as many as we possibly can. Just before we round off the session, I'm keen. I'm absolutely certain that people will want to stay in touch with all, everyone on the panel here. So perhaps if you could let us know what the best way for people to stay in touch, whether it's LinkedIn, whether you have a blog or Instagram or wherever. So Tina, how can people connect with you should they want to?
I'm on LinkedIn, Christina Lovelock. You should be able to find me.
Fantastic, and also lots of good blogs on BA Times, including the BA's Gone Bad, yes. I believe, which is one that's definitely worth reading, amongst all of the other good ones, of course.
Thank you.
Debbie.
Yes, I'm on LinkedIn as well, and I'm also on Twitter. And also, if anybody wants to contact me, they can contact me at AssistKD.com.
Fantastic. And Grant.
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn as well. Also on Instagram under my company name, which is Scarlett with 2 T's _solutions, and on Twitter GW_Wright.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, thank you everyone that's tuned in live, and thank you for everyone that's watching the recording as well. So the plan is, just so everyone knows, that I'm aiming to run about 1 webinar a week-ish during the sort of lockdown period. So if you go on to blackmetric.com/events, you'll see all of the upcoming webinars. As it stands at the moment, we've got upcoming webinars, well, 3 or 4 upcoming webinars on things like culture, on business analysis in scaled agile, on business analysis what's new, and a whole bunch of other ones in the planning as well. And the ethos behind these webinars originally was around perhaps talking about things that aren't core to business analysis, that we don't talk about as much as we always could do or should do. So we're sort of unlikely to ever run a webinar on how to do a better use case. That's not to say that's not important, but we're more likely to run stuff on the sort of periphery and on the intersection. So with that in mind, you will get an email shortly after, probably tomorrow morning, which will have a link to the recording, but also a link to a post-event survey, which I'll be very, very grateful if you could fill in. There are about 3 questions on there, but one of the questions is, what topics would you like to see covered? And if you put a topic in there, and if it's one that I can source some guests on, I will try and run it. So please do fill that in. So the final thing for me to say is, Tina, Debbie, Grant, thank you for taking time on on a late evening. It's been genuinely fun, as it always is. So thank you very much. Have a good evening, and thanks everyone for tuning in. And well, hope to see you all in person at some point soon. Bye everyone. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.